Good morning. It's 28 minutes past 1 a.m. Happy Thanksgiving to you. I'm Charlie Dugdale, and this is the late news from Channel 2. Lynette Fromm has been found guilty of attempting to assassinate President Ford. The maximum penalty is life imprisonment. A federal jury in Sacramento returned the verdict after deliberating more than 19 hours. Now, the jury could have convicted her of a lesser charge of assault, but did not. Fromm will be sentenced December 17th. Her lawyer said he will appeal. President Ford Wednesday gave a grudging boost to New York City's failing economy, an 11th-hour move not entirely applauded by leaders of the nation's biggest city. Mr. Ford proposed a short-term federal loan program of up to $2.3 billion, adding he recommended it because New York has bailed itself out, as he said. Robert Shackby has a look at what New York faces in that bailing out process.
The price New York is paying for federal help is high. First, new taxes. Cigarette taxes up 4 to 5 cents a pack. Non-federal inheritance taxes for city residents up 50%. Sales taxes imposed on massage parlors, beauty shops, barber shops, and the like. And most expensively, city income tax up 25%. For a family of 4 with a $25,000 income, that will mean an extra $93 a year. A lot of businessmen who've cheered the effort to avoid default think the price may be too high.
The essential problem with New York is to make it a competitive city to other places, competitive for living and for business. The higher the taxes, the less competitive. New York is already the most highly taxed city in the country. It will do nothing to help the local economy. In fact, it will discourage it. And it will discourage people from living here and doing business here.
New York City has already suffered a loss of over 500,000 jobs in the last 6 years. Some 30 major corporations have moved to suburban headquarters, and 3 major corporations, General Signal, Continental Can, and Union Carbide, are planning or considering moves to the suburbs now. The loss of 30,000 city jobs in the past 6 months clearly hurts the municipal unions, which nevertheless are planning to lend the city $2.5 billion from their pension funds.
Alternative is default. Default means another 100,000 jobs down the drain. Default means that your pension funds are useless. But our members live in the city. Our members live in the city, and default, they know, means a depressed, decimated city that would need at least a decade to come back from the bottom.
The city rescue plan in itself is no guarantee of fiscal stability. Just about every banker expects periodic crises to come. The first problem may be just 3 weeks away when the state housing agency faces a new risk of default. Robert Shackney, CBS News, New York.
Across the Atlantic, President Gustavo Gomes cracked down on Portugal's left after crushing a revolt by pro-communist troops. A state of siege has been declared in Lisbon. The orders include martial law, press censorship, and suspended civil rights. Bob McNamara reports from Lisbon.
Today, soldiers loyal to the Portuguese government launched a counteroffensive against the rebel troops. The show of force that included tanks and warplanes pressured the militant leftist leaders into negotiating a surrender. The left-wing coup attempt had collapsed. On the edge of Lisbon this afternoon, an armored column moved near a leftist-held artillery base. Earlier, attempting to avoid bloodshed, the tank commander and a rebel leader had met to negotiate the base commander's arrest. So far during the crisis, at least 4 persons, including several soldiers, were killed in skirmishes. Though the radical soldiers still maintain a few pockets of resistance around Lisbon, a government source says it's only a matter of hours before they fall. Fear of civil war has not been wiped away by the government's military success, but in the past few hours, the threat of an outbreak has greatly diminished. With martial law imposed under the state of emergency, Lisbon returns to the days of the dictator. Political demonstrations are banned. News will be censored, the mail open. The midnight to dawn curfew will remain in effect. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Lisbon.
When we continue, the administration has decided to reopen limited reviews on the John Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassinations, and Kentucky is going another round with those pesky blackbirds. Details after this break. Again, the news, the assassinations of both Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy will be reviewed by the Justice Department. Last week, the Senate Intelligence Committee was told about FBI efforts to discredit Dr. King. Yesterday, Attorney General Levi ordered a re-examination of Dr. King's assassination. More on that from Fred Graham.
After Dr. King was shot to death on a hotel balcony in Memphis, the FBI conducted an investigation that resulted in the arrest of James Earl Ray. But because Ray pleaded guilty and was never tried, the details of the FBI's findings have never been revealed. Ray's lawyers have charged that the Justice Department has resisted disclosing the evidence it had against Ray. Ray now says he was tricked into pleading guilty and is asking the courts for a trial. His lawyer says the FBI might have had a motive for a cover-up.
The FBI's director had penned a note to a newsman suggesting that Dr. King be ridiculed for staying at an expensive white hotel in Memphis, the Holiday Inn, rather than staying at the Lorraine Motel, which was black-owned and black-operated. And as a result of that criticism, which appeared of Dr. King in the press, Dr. King moved to the Lorraine Motel, where he was then murdered. Now, of course, a fact like that, I think, might very well hamper an open investigation into the case by the FBI.
Officials here emphasize that this is only a review of the FBI's investigation of the King assassination to see if it was fair and thorough. Based on the outcome of that review, Attorney General Levy will decide whether or not to reopen the King case. Fred Graham, CBS News at the Justice Department.
I called him Levi. It is Levy. Well, it's spelled L-E-V-I. And I wear them all the time. On the bird front, it's not quite clear who counted them, but officials down in Kentucky say some 77 million blackbirds have stopped once again on their southward migration to plague the residents of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and environs. It's not that the swarming birds are just a nuisance to farmers and gardeners, but they bring threats of disease. Bruce Hall has a report.
Health officials fear that millions of fungus-carrying blackbirds may cause an epidemic of sleeping sickness and other serious diseases in western Kentucky. All attempts to kill some of the pesky birds have been blocked by the federal government and the courts. So now, wildlife specialists are trying to scare the birds away from the populated areas and force them into the rural countryside in order to reduce the health hazard. The experimental plan was launched last night as a bird-chasing helicopter began circling the roost as the birds returned for the night. Meanwhile, policemen on the ground fired noise bombs into the air. It was an unusual procedure, but every other plan to move the birds has failed, and area residents were willing to try anything. But as nightfall came, it appeared this plan had also failed. Officials were hoping that half of the birds would be scared away, but most appeared to remain in the roost. At sunrise this morning, the birds filled the sky, and officials were able to make a more accurate survey of their efforts.
What percentage do you think that you were able to move out during the night?
Well, I estimated last night around 40%. I don't think it'll go quite that high, probably 30%.
But officials remain optimistic that the birds can be moved, and they will continue the scare tactics for at least 3 more nights. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
That's got to be a real dilemma. If you're a bird lover, of course, you try to see that everything is okay for the birds, but if they're bringing disease and pestilence to the area, wow, what do you do? Well, you do what those folks are doing. That's what you do. And thank heaven you're living out here, not there. The Lakers and the Kings both should have stood in bed last night, and some Chicago kids have their own way of saying Happy Thanksgiving to the jobless. These stories and more in just a minute or so. Again, the news turning to sports. In basketball, the L.A. Lakers dropped a 118-101 game to the Portland Trail Blazers last night as Sidney Wicks phoned in 29 points. In hockey, the Washington Capitals skated to a 7-2 victory over our L.A. Kings. Hey, what's happening to those guys? They were doing so well there for a while. And the California Seals edged the Vancouver Canucks 2-1. Oh, tomorrow morning, the Rams, as you may know if you're a football fan, the Rams take on the Detroit Lions in a nationally televised football game. Pre-game coverage begins on Channel 2 at 9 a.m., so it's up early, put the turkey in, and 9 a.m. for Ram time tomorrow, or pre-game coverage. On the fire scene, the Santa Ana winds are finally winding down, a big help to the firefighters. The 46,000-acre Tahunga fire is now 80% contained. Full containment is expected by 6 p.m. this evening. However, the Mount Baldy fire is still going strong at this hour, and that fire has burned 25,000 acres and is 30% contained. There might be a chance of showers in the mountains later today, and that would certainly aid fire conditions. Temperatures today will be cooler. The high at downtown Civic Center will be only 66, with 64 at the beaches, 68 in the valley, and 53 in the mountains. Cloudy skies will be the order of the day, so it'll be a nice, cool Thanksgiving day. And people say, oh, gee, the weather's so rotten, look at that, no sunshine. That's our air conditioning. Look at it that way. Free, cheap air conditioning, okay? The Thanksgiving basket, loaded with goodies and given to poor families, is a tradition as American as the holiday itself. But in Chicago, a group of kids have come up with something that may be much better. Randy Daniels has that story.
Holy Angels has long been something special to blacks in Chicago, an elementary school that combines a solid education with religion, yet a school that encourages black awareness and cultural identification. All this in an area where crime and urban decay are facts of life and high unemployment a frightening reality. At this time of the year, at Thanksgiving, the children of Holy Angels understand the hopelessness of being without a job. 400 students wrote letters to Chicago area businesses requesting jobs for those trapped by unemployment and poverty.
I said that I was 10 years old and that there was a vicious circle in Chicago where there was no end and no beginning. And I asked them, could they give one job to one person, a man or a woman? And I asked them just to help somebody else.
Well, when people don't have jobs, they'll lose their self-respect for their children and their wife, and they just go crazy.
Mm-hmm.
In past years, children here have collected food for the poor and distributed parcels to needy families. But that was like putting a Band-Aid on the problem, said Father Paul Smith, who thinks this is a more realistic approach, one that also benefits the students.
The children have had practice in the basic skills of writing letters and that kind of thing. But even deeper and a more serious thing is what it has done to awaken the children to the realities of unemployment in our time.
Most businessmen responded favorably to the letter campaign, some with jobs, 50 new jobs in all. One went to Theodis Lancaster, unemployed for 9 months. This week he began working in a warehouse of the Hussman Refrigerator Company because of a letter received from a Holy Angel student. Lancaster called the new job a miracle. Randy Daniels, CBS News, Chicago.
Well, it's good news from the younger generation. We can sure use that. It's, let's call it 1:45, because it's about 40 seconds away from that. 1:45 on this Thanksgiving morning. That's the late edition of the news from Channel 2. If you're up by 7 a.m., don't forget to watch the CBS Morning News from New York with Hughes Rudd reporting. Got a marvelous film coming up for you on The Late Show. Fabulous Mitzi Gaynor and Dale Robertson and Dennis Day in a thing called Golden Girl. And our Late Show is a real pot scrubber called Scandal Incorporated starring Robert Hutton. Our writer for this newscast was a fellow named Bob Ferris, a name not unfamiliar to television and radio fans around the area. Our technical director is Dean Moore. He's the fellow pushing the buttons. Our director, who's calling the cues and hurrying up Charlie every once in a while, is Frank Euster. And way up there on Mount Wilson, a lonely man. Lonely man. Every time I talk to him on the phone, he says, oh, I'm so lonely. Larry Bloomfield. And in our videotape room is Greg Slaughter. He did some of the editing for us. An interesting name, a fellow who cuts tape, and his name is Slaughter, huh? How about that? Ted Kennerty will be back with you tomorrow night. This is Charlie Dugdale wishing you all a happy Thanksgiving and early good morning.